Yeah, one, you mentioned MacGyver in your story,
Yeah.
which is incredibly cool. And then two, that's like the foundation of your DIY kind of like trips and living
Mhm.
off the land and doing it yourself. And yeah, dude, that's awesome. That's
I need to.
fantastic.
I'll get my wife in here so you can tell her that because she does not believe, despite I'm wearing flannel right now for all the listeners. She says I'm not outdoorsy as I think I am. So thank you, Reid, for that accolade.
I'm all in, dude.
We'll cut that clip and send it to you. You can show it to her tonight.
Perfect, love it.
Welcome to Guys Fishing Weekly. We don't just fish, we hug.
Hey, buddy.
Eddie, how are you, dude?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. I'm good. Hey, who we got on the show today?
We're talking with Chris Lyford, senior editor for Psychotherapy Network and the author of a great writing piece titled In Search of the Great Male Friend.
Chris is a great conversation. Love that dude. Would love to go do a backpacking trip with that guy.
Absolutely. Today on the show, we're talking about navigating competition in friendships, the necessary dynamics of a good friendship, state of the union in men's therapy, and getting into the great outdoors.
Great discussion topics. It was awesome. Let's get into it, dude.
Hey, Chris, how are you?
Hey, Ed, I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Doing great.
Welcome to the show, man. Good to have you here, Chris.
Good to be here. This is a real treat. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Well, we're excited to talk to you. We came across one of your articles that you wrote recently, earlier this year, titled In Search of the Great Male Friend. And it just was hit us like a dagger, just a direct lineup of kind of the things that we are talking about and trying to approach in the world. And so it's an honor to get to talk to you about that and many other topics that, you're around on a daily basis.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you guys saying that. I mean, I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Chris Lyford. I'm the senior editor at Psychotherapy Networker magazine, based here in DC. We're a mental health publication for therapists and social workers, really the premier therapy magazine. If you're a therapist, if you've been doing this for a while, if you read, then you know who we are. We've been around for about 40 years, and we put on a pretty bomb conference every year in DC. About 4,000 therapists attend. We have a lot of fun. We try to tell stories. We're not an academic publication, and so I wrote this piece about a year ago for an issue that we did on friendship. Tells the story of my own experience with friends, trying to make friends, struggling to keep friendships, and just kind of reflecting on the state of male friendships in general. So thank you guys for reading.
Absolutely. Chris, so your background, senior editor, you're a writer, clearly that you have some of that. And then how much have you learned about the psychotherapy world? Is that a part of your background and schooling as well, or did that just kind of fall into your lap that way?
That's a good question, actually. Yeah. So I've been with the magazine for about 10 years now. I'm not a therapist. I consider myself a journalist. I'm really just a curious guy. And I love to tell stories, and I love to learn new things. And that's what this job has really afforded me. So, every 2 months we put out an issue, and I try to approach a story really just from the standpoint of your average person. I consider myself naturally curious. My background is in journalism. So I worked at the Washington Post for a couple of years, what feels like a lifetime ago. I hopped from there over to a little publication called the Atlantic Post, which quickly folded. And I found myself unemployed in the, cold of DC with no health insurance, and just honestly feeling pretty miserable. And found this job on Craigslist of all places. And
Oh, wow.
it's been home. It's been home. The people are amazing. Shout out to my colleagues, Olivia Kent, editor in chief over there, Alicia Munoz, and Lauren Dockett, who are my two fellow writers.
Nice.
So yeah.
That's great.
Been there for a while.
Yeah, it's interesting because, there's in this world of experts, right? Me being a teacher, I can tell you that, well, I could tell you a few things about psychotherapy. My dad's a therapist. My brother was in social work.
Mm.
My wife has a background in psychology. So maybe a few things, but just being a teacher, the things you pick up about the human psyche and kids and all that kind of stuff, right? Yeah, I don't have any
Mm.
doctoral background or science or anything like that, but
Mm.
I can tell you why kids are boneheads a lot of times. I don't know if that makes me an expert, but yeah, so that's really cool that you've gotten into it and you found a home there. And something in your writing about things that I think are so incredibly important for us,
Mm.
especially the male gender and men and friendships, because we struggle so much with it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's an issue that's really been close to my heart for a long time. I mean, as a man, and I'll say I'm the only male member of the editorial team at Psychotherapy Networker. So I felt kind of this responsibility when this issue came up to kind of raise my hand and say, my experience isn't representative of all men, but I do have some things to say about this. And as it just so happened, in the middle of writing this piece, I lost a really close friend. And so writing this was incredibly cathartic, but also very difficult, um, and really, helped me stop and just kind of think about what it is I want out of a friendship, what I bring to a friendship, and really what our society should be doing to help a lot of men who are struggling with these same questions.
No doubt. In the piece, one thing you talk about is, I think at the time you were 36 and you wrote that you had kind of nobody to play with, and being a 36-year-old, saying that was kind of you know a shameful or pathetic thing to say.
Mm.
That hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, we're the same age, and at times I can feel that way as well. But why was this such a profound moment that kind of drove a lot of this piece?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a great question. The kind of the context for that quote was. Long story short, I bought a video game probably about 2 years ago. I'll say I love the outdoors. I love breathing fresh air and camping under the stars and making a fire and whatnot. I also have days where I just want to crash on the couch and do nothing. So this was one of those days where I just wanted to like let my brain rot a little bit, play a junky video game. So I picked up this
Yeah.
thing. I practiced the night before a friend was coming over. We were going to play it together, and I spent about 2 or 3 hours memorizing the moves because I wanted to kick his butt. And it's always fun for me when I can start with an unfair advantage. So
Right, right.
yeah, I practiced till my fingers hurt. I was getting into it, and I'm
Yeah.
sort of building it up in my head like, man, this is gonna be fun tomorrow when he sees that I know how to like whip out this move or whatnot. Um, the guy comes over the next day. He sits down. We play for about 10 minutes. He was a good friend. Um, we've kind of lost touch, not for this reason, but about 10 minutes into the game, he says, like, I'm just not feeling it. And he says, he makes up some excuse. He says, I got laundry to do, or like, I gotta clean my room or something. And he gets up and he says, we can just play another game online that we both like. And he leaves. And I'm sitting there, and my wife, who happens to be a therapist, for better or worse, most times for better, she'd given us some privacy, and she comes into the room where I'm sitting, and she says, what happened? Where'd he go? And I said, oh, he wasn't really feeling the game, and so he checked out. I think I'm just going to return this thing. I said, I feel like I got nobody to play with. It just kind of it slipped out. It was like a dam had broken, and I
Uh-huh.
didn't get really upset, but I did feel very vulnerable and kind of hurt. And part of it was I built this up to be this amazing thing that it just wasn't. So part of that's on me. But when I heard myself say that, it just really spoke to kind of this uh, child part of me that I think it was almost like something that a kid might have said on the playground, like whose friends run off and do an activity without them. It just felt very lonely. And I kind of caught myself off guard when that happened. And so my wife moves in for a hug, and I said something like to try to defuse the awkward situation, like, oh, when we have kids, I'll make my own friends. Which I said that, and I was like, that's. And then I heard myself say that, and I was like, oh my God, is that what it takes to like have a good, solid friend nowadays? I got to like, you know, have a
Yeah.
child? Yeah. So yeah, it was, it was this moment where I I really kind of sat with that vulnerability and that hurt in a way I hadn't before. It was kind of a wake up call. I won't say I found any answers kind of sitting there, but I did give my permission to feel that, and I think that's a big step for any man who wants to confront these hard questions about friendship.
I think you learned also not to practice the moves so much beforehand.
Yeah, set your expectations low, and you'll never be disappointed.
Yeah,
Right, right.
that's
Yeah,
another
but
good learning too. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
brought up something that I think
Mhm.
is super interesting, and it's almost like this juxtaposition in there where there's this competition piece of us, right? Like we've been
Right.
taught as men to, you know what I mean, like to compete,
Mhm.
and winning is important, and blah blah blah, and you're practicing for 2 hours so you don't make yourself look like a fool, and there's something about that is really um you do those things, and then to have that moment of like, oh my gosh, I don't have anybody to hang out with, right? And
Mhm.
that's like a
Mhm.
real stretch. That's a real difference in emotion. um and combating that, you know what I mean, like
Mhm.
those things that we've been taught our whole lives, and those messages of being hard-nosed, rub dirt on it, all those kinds of things, compete, win, blah blah blah. When men don't have that, or they feel that other side of that, and we don't really know what to do with it. And so
Mhm.
that was what that stood out to me about that piece for sure. Was that piece about that, like we don't always have the capacity to handle that or know what to do with that.
Mhm.
So you're sharing that was really cool. Yeah, that was kudos for you to be able to kind of tap into some of that stuff, even with the self-talk where you're like,
Mhm.
I'll just have to make my own friends, and then you're like, wait a
Mhm.
minute, whoa, like what?
Yeah.
Having that kind of self-awareness is amazing.
Yeah.
And so I don't think a lot of guys maybe have that either.
Mhm. That's you make a couple great points there. I mean, that element of competition you were talking about early on, that really pervades so much of male friendships. There's ideally there's some love behind it. There's such a thing as friendly competition, and then there's competition that gets unhealthy, where you're kind of looking over your neighbor's shoulder to make sure you don't have less than they do. And I've kind of found myself with other men, with friends, kind of sizing myself up a bit, if I'm being honest. I still love my friends, but there is kind of this sense of am I performing? Am I measuring up? That's really hard to break free of, and just kind of coming to this place of self acceptance and allowing yourself to be vulnerable. To the second part of your statement there. Um, I'm the kind of person who I think, when I found myself in that space feeling really vulnerable, and my wife hugged me, and I think we were just it was a space I could have just sat in and not said anything. I immediately tried to defuse it with some humor, which is my tendency, and so many
Right.
Right.
men's tendency is to
Absolutely.
tamp it down or deflect. Um, so I'm not perfect at this by any means. I'm constantly learning. I still struggle with this. So many men do, and my goal was really just to kind of bring more attention to that, and hopefully touch some people in the process. So I'm so glad to hear that it resonated
Yeah.
with you too.
Well, I'm guilty as charged because I diffused your vulnerable statement with some humor right after.
Hey, I'm about
So
it.
Yeah, we do that all the time. Yeah. Um,
but I think it's important that at some point you almost like burst at the seams when you don't let those
Mhm.
things out, and it's kind of like it just squeaked out of your mouth and you're like, no, put it back in, put it back in. I'm
Right.
I can't let my wife of all people see my weakness. And
Mhm.
I think that's kind of what happens with guys in general, is like at some point the dam just breaks.
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah.
And I think, when I look at our trip, our GFW trip, it used to be when we first started and we had guys on it, it was all about the competition. We had fishing
Mhm. Mhm.
competitions every day, like who catches the most, who catches the biggest, who catches the first. Like every day there
Yeah.
was a competition that got in the way of, eventually it got in the way of, I think, the purpose of what we enjoyed most about the trip, which was being together, because the
Yeah.
competition became something that was bigger than, wait a minute, what are we doing? Right. We're here to hang out and be together.
Mhm.
And so that was a tough time for some guys on the trip, including me. That was a really hard part of the trip for me,
Mhm.
in terms of the expectations when we're going and all of those things. And so our guys fishing weekend trip had that kind of morphing to where I think as we got older and we started to realize that there was so much more that we get out of this than just this stupid, silly competition that ended up getting nasty sometimes and getting right. And so it's interesting how that has morphed into us now having something that's really way cooler than any
Mhm.
competition.
Yeah.
There's still some minor competitions that go on with us in terms of like who can tell the rudest joke or something like that. But
Reid is the king of practicing the moves on the game before he goes on the
Okay. Okay.
weekend just so he can win. He's that guy. So don't let him trick you.
the
As long as
competition
you don't
never leaves.
As long as you're not bringing like I don't know what you call them, but like fish you've caught beforehand on the trip, like a
Right.
10-pound bass.
He definitely he definitely
In the
stocks
cooler, like
rivers and
cheap.
stuff in the yeah. And he digs holes and
Uh,
plants fish. So
Nice.
yeah.
yep.
No.
You you put a ton of interesting stats in this. One that's kind of stood out to me was that you stated that over half of men are unsatisfied with their friendships.
Mhm.
When you came across that, I guess what have you learned as you've wrote this piece and then probably talked about it more and continue to think about it? But what is driving some of that dissatisfaction?
Yeah, yeah. To kind of speak to other folks who've called this out. So, I mean, it is something that I think the people who were on this are, I mean, they're really in the thick of it. So, like, our U.S. Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, has called attention to what he calls an epidemic of loneliness. He calls loneliness a public health crisis. The Department of Health and Human Services actually released a report in 2023. It was called Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation, showing that loneliness increases your risk of early death, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, diabetes, cognitive impairment. There's some studies that show older folks who don't have a support network are 32% likelier to die from any cause. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, I mean, there's some research coming out of Harvard that says loneliness will also shorten your life expectancy. So, um, it's reading those stats really it struck a chord with me and really brought into focus what's at stake here. I mean, this is literally a problem that's killing men. It's not just something that you feel. It's something that happens to your body. And so if just kind of feeling lonely enough isn't to kind of tip you into action, I mean, hopefully those really sobering stats will. To speak to why men are unsatisfied with their friendships, I think it really it depends who you ask. In the piece I write about this, people have blamed everybody from parents to teachers to government leaders to popular media for not prioritizing friendship. I think the fact is our culture doesn't prize friendship to the same degree that other countries do. American culture prioritizes performance and achievement, especially when it comes to men. And so if you don't learn to form friendships because nobody's taught you how to do that or how to maintain friendships, or you don't really know what a good friendship looks like, you'll likely be unhappy with the friendships that you do have. There's a researcher, her name is Niobe Way. She's affiliated with New York University. Excuse me, New York, yes, New York University. She did a study of young boys that showed around the age of, I believe it was like 6 or 7, the switch kind of flips where they begin to look at friendships with other boys as gay or feminine, or that they wall themselves off from other boys, and that thinking kind of lasts throughout their lives and causes a lot of damage later. So we need to change the narrative around boys friendships, and really intervene at an early age and show boys that there's nothing wrong with having a loving, warm friendship with other men. It doesn't mean that you're weak or you're a sissy or you're gay. And right now we have generations of men who are just feeling lost and alone and self-conscious and afraid to ask for help. So
Right.
Yeah, no doubt. We had on the show a couple weeks ago. We had Jennifer Wallace, who wrote the book Never Enough, and her that book is all about how parents are putting their kids in so many different extracurricular activities that they just feel like they're never measuring up. But
Mhm.
with all of that, comes the fact that you're not, you are coming in contact with a lot of people probably through those different extracurriculars, different sports teams and different clubs and things like that. But because you're in so many things, you kind of lose that skill of making friends. And then on top of that, you add this narrative that we've been talking about with the competition, and all of a sudden
Achievement.
your
Mhm.
grades need to be better than everybody else around you, and you have this scarcity mindset of like, the men in your life are you're competing against them to get ahead.
Mhm.
um I 100% echo your comments on, we really got to change the narrative on that for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that achievement stuff really gets in the way of so much. In teaching and kids, and you see these kids with so much anxiety and everything about getting an A and getting, these certain grades, and to the point where it's like, are you paying attention to how you're thinking and what's happening in the process along the way of,
Mhm.
and then when they don't, or when there's a failure of some kind, it's a complete and utter meltdown. And I've seen that for a long time, that kind of achievement, the shift into that has been real eye opening in the last 10, 15 years. Got to go to the best college, got to go to, so there's a lot to that, that I think the idea of being able to nurture friendships and having people in your life that can help you navigate those things, right, in a healthy way, to where the anxiety doesn't build up. And we see it. I just see it happening so much in young kids, my own even, and it's striking. It's scary,
Mhm.
um, when you come across that stuff. So yeah, that idea of changing the narrative, hugely important.
Yeah. I don't think it's any coincidence that so much of therapy involves, especially when you're working around trauma. And I would like to classify loneliness as a trauma. I mean, the statistics I pointed to, I mean, definitely indicate
Mm.
this is something traumatic that happens to you. So much of therapy involves having the client go in and communicate, have a gestalt dialogue with their child part, and say, like, what would you say to your child self who's wounded and hurt and feels like nobody's there for them. And that's a lot of therapy, is kind of confronting your past in that way, or more indirectly. There are therapists like Sue Johnson, who's a big name in the therapy world, and there's Dan Siegel, who talk about the power of attachment and say that we are wired to attach to other people even from an early age. There's a really amazing experiment that was done decades ago by this guy named Ed Tronick. It's called the still face experiment. I'm not sure if either of you are familiar with that.
Mm-mm.
Mm.
Mm-mm.
So what it entailed was it was actually a study between mothers and their infant children. And um, in this study, the mother would sit in front of the child. She'd play with the child in their baby seat, high chair. That the baby would goo goo and gaga and babble and play with the mother and really attune. You could see this eye contact and this sort of mirroring. And then the mother was instructed to just have no expression, say nothing, don't interact with the child just for a moment. And within seconds, you see the baby start to become dysregulated and distressed and really upset and doing everything. It's like it goes into fight or flight mode. And then the mother is instructed to switch back. And for those like 30 seconds, like I've watched videos of this, it's heartbreaking because you see
Wow.
a child that's just yearning for connection. I mean, it, it,
Right.
the idea that we are wired to connect with other people, that we seek connection just on a biological level is just so apparent. And once the mother switches back to mirroring the baby and mirroring the tone of voice and just being a loving mother, like it's like it
Right.
it switches back and the baby's smiley again. So I mean, I guess what you take from that is, yeah, we're wired for connection, but you can also have a reparative experience. I think even later in life, I mean, we talk about men who are lost, who are lonely, who are angry, who are, violent in some cases. I mean, I think a lot of these men belong to what, my friend at the Good Men Project, Mark Green, calls the movable middle, which I also refer to in the piece. I mean, these are men
Mm.
who have the capacity to be loving and warm and really want that, but they need permission to do that. So that was a long answer
Right.
to your question, but I
Right.
just wanted to bring that up.
No,
That's I think really fascinating stuff.
And I think your last statement there about the permission to seek these things, and I think there's a real problem because I think a lot of guys don't give themselves that permission or don't get that permission from a
Mm,
friend group or whatever. That probably leads to more dissatisfaction,
mhm,
because when that discovery happens and you actually have that permission, things just get richer and better, and it's amazing the realization that comes with that. And so that's really important and a great way to put that.
mm,
One of the other things that stood out to me in your piece, Chris, was when you talked about confronting your friend, and almost in that kind of same way of, hey, I'm putting all this effort in, and it's not being reciprocated in this friendship, right? That was a
mhm,
frustrational part for you in the realization of that.
mhm,
um and putting yourself out there to say something about that, because I think there is a time when it's like, am I getting out of this what I'm putting in? Because there's times when it's transactional where you're like, I need more today out of this thing. But
mhm,
if you're the
mhm,
one that's always putting in the time and the effort, when's that point where you're like, enough, I got to cut this ship loose, whatever, you know what I mean? But
mhm,
that's a reality, I think, in a lot of people. Every friendship we have isn't going to be the best friendship ever. And so
mhm.
navigating that, I think, is important too.
Yeah, yeah. That was a really tricky situation because I mean, this was a friend. I talked about this in the piece as well. This is a friend I had known for over a decade. We'd had a lot of good experiences. Part of me had trouble coming to terms with the fact that friendships evolve and change. You know, this was a guy who I initially felt like had the capacity to really be there for me. I mean, what people value in a relationship differs from person to person. I've learned that one of the things I really need from a friendship is for that person to be reliable. Now that can mean a number of things, but in this case, it means just showing up, just being there. You know, if you say you're going to come over at 8, come over at,
Right.
I don't know, no longer than like no later than 9 p.m. Just be there. I mean, you hear about the best guy friends are the ones that you can call at 3 in the morning and you know they'll pick up the phone if you got an emergency. It's nice to know that you have that kind of friend. I don't do that I often. I can't remember the
Right.
last time I did it, but I'd like to feel like I've got somebody who's in the trenches with me, who's really invested in my well-being and I'm invested in theirs, and we'll grow together. I mean, that's a really kind of honest frame there, but that's what I look for in a friendship is somebody who's just who I can rely on. And so having to kind of draw that line and say, look, man, we've talked about this like multiple times, but you continue to drop the ball. And frankly, it hurts. And I think you get why it hurts. Um, and then be burned again. That was hard. So
Right. Right.
yeah, I wrestled with that.
I guess, looking forward to things that guys can do in this realm. In this piece, you do talk about, approaching your friends and having those conversations. But what are some things that you think that you've come across that guys can do to find, more satisfying friendships, more friendship, a friendship? What types of things have you come across that seemingly work for
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say and I've had to learn to do this myself. Try to keep in mind that a friend can't be everything to you. I also mentioned that in the piece. There's a therapist named Esther Perel who actually she talks about kind of expecting too much from our partners. Like 100 years ago, 150, 200 years ago, for most of human history, we've relied on communities to provide us with support, to provide us with intellectual stimulation, with love, with friendship, with familial support, and with kind of the dissolution of towns. I mean, we're all so separate now. A lot of us spend our lives online. We work from home. We're not. embedded in the community in the way that we used to be. And so I think we expect too much from the people who are in our lives, whether it's a partner or the few friends we have. And I kind of had to come to terms with the fact that, like, hey, I only had a few friends, really good friends to begin with. And maybe I'm leaning on them too much. So I had to kind of give my friend some grace there. So I think to answer your question, um, just kind of being realistic about what your friends can offer you. As far as finding friends, really just takes a leap of faith, and you want to do it in a way that I think doesn't feel too much like work. So, if you have a hobby, maybe try to find, whether it's running or gaming or fishing or hiking, whatever. See if there's a community of other people out there who enjoy the same things you do. You may not hit it off with them immediately. I think, just also speaking of being realistic, not everybody's going to be a perfect match. Not every therapist is going to be a perfect match. Not every potential romantic partner is going to be a perfect match. Not every friend is going to be a perfect match. So I think, unfortunately, the answer is set realistic expectations, but try to find that foothold. Try to find that thing that you love, that you think other people love, and then just really take that leap of faith. I know it's scary. I struggle with it too. Just kind of getting out there. It can feel forced at times. I'll close with this. There's a great movie called I Love You, Man. I don't know if either of you
Yeah.
remember that. With
Yeah.
Paul Rudd and Jason Segel. It came out like 20 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's about this guy who's like in his 30s. He's got a fiance.
The bass back.
Slap at the bass. Yeah. It's so good. So many quotable lines from that movie. But
Yeah.
it's this guy who's like he's made it in a lot of other areas of his life, but he just doesn't have like a good male friend. And he's like, it's this like crisis of identity. Like, oh my God. Like, well, first of all, what am I going to do about my groomsmen? I have no groomsmen. But also, like, where do I find my people? And he finds that, like, his brother and his dad, like, a lot of them have just kind of like held on to friends since like college. And, there's some friends from work that, like, you know, it feels forced, and he really struggles to find his people. And eventually he finds this guy who's just like a polar opposite, kind of wacky. And anyways, watch the movie because it's a good one. But this is not an uncommon experience, and it can feel very disorienting at this stage of life when it feels like a lot of relationships have kind of solidified, other people's relationships. Just getting out there can be tricky, but you got to take that leap of faith. Just I know it's scary, but you got to do it.
Right. No, that's good advice.
100%. So as the senior editor of a therapy magazine editorial, switching topics slightly, men and therapy are kind of like oil and water. They seemingly just don't go together. It's a little bit tongue in cheek, but in a lot of ways they don't. I guess being somebody far closer to the industry than Reid and I are, what is the kind of state of the union of therapy and men today? Where's the industry going? What things seemingly work for men and don't? I guess that's a lot of questions in there, but kind of state of the union of therapy and men today.
Yeah. No, it makes perfect sense. Yeah, I mean, I should back up and say, again, I'm not a therapist. I don't do therapy. I just observe them and write about them as best I can.
But we know you could play one on TV if you needed to. So.
My wife hates to hear this, but I say I speak the language of therapists. So whenever she gets upset, I say, "Can you go inside and contact that part of you that's feeling upset with me right now?" It does not work. It'll backfire. 100%.
That's a great way to get it sleeping on the couch.
Yeah, this is my bed behind me for anybody who's watching this on YouTube.
One of my favorites is, "Can you help me understand why blah blah?" And she's just like, "Shut the hell up. That's mine. Don't." Yeah, like.
Yeah. The best part is, so my wife and I both work from home, and I can sometimes hear her on the other side of the wall doing her therapy sessions, but I can't hear what she's saying. I just hear the tone of voice, and it's this very kind of sing-songy, soothy. I know it's something like, what are some other things that have worked for you? It's very therapist-y. It works. She's brilliant at what she does. It just doesn't sound as good coming out of my mouth. So
right.
So I will back up and answer your question now. So the state of the union when it comes to therapy, there are folks who are in the trenches doing really good work. Like I mentioned, Mark Green, who appears in the piece, Mark Grayson. Mark Green is with Reclaiming Manhood, I believe is the name of his organization. Mark Grayson is with the Good Men Project, which is a wonderful organization that provides a lot of resources for men, just generally. Um, Vivek Murthy, I mentioned him. I think a lot of therapists will lean into the topic of friendship, but it might, in working with our clients, but it might feel a little foreign to them. And I would say any therapist who's doing an intake, meeting a client for the first time, should ask about friendship. I don't know that all therapists are doing that. But I mean, getting a sense of your client's support network and resources is incredibly important. My wife, who works at the VA, she works with veterans. I know that's a question that she asks all her clients, and I think it's probably a staple in working with that population, because these are trauma survivors where the work can be kind of volatile. But I think for your average therapist, I don't get the sense that that's a question they ask everybody. Um, I
Mm.
think it's to get to the other half of your question. Um, how do you get men involved in therapy, and what are the barriers? I think that most men see therapy as airing your dirty laundry. They see it as something that's kind of too feminine, or it's just hard. A lot of the times men are being, for lack of a better word, forced to go to therapy, dragged to therapy by a partner who's maybe rightfully unhappy with them, and just wants them to get help and is concerned. So it can feel a bit like a chore. um, it's also confessing some of your deepest emotions to a stranger. Just opening up, period, is hard for a lot of men. On top of that, it is a female dominated field. I'll say that 70% of therapists are women, and most of the clients who go to therapy are women. So I think, I talk about men's spaces in the piece and how so many men feel like there just isn't a place for them to gather and to bond. I think that by and large, therapy doesn't really posit itself as a place that is good, that is safe for men, where men can just kind of let their guard down and relax. Um, but my experience with therapy, I mean, I've been in therapy, it's been a while, but it's kind of like eating your vegetables. It's like you may not enjoy it at first. It is good for you, and you might find that you like it. I sound like my parents now, trying to force me to eat vegetables, but it's objectively a good thing, and these are objectively caring people who really have your best interests at heart. And it is work. It is hard work. I won't um, downplay that. You do need to be in it to win it. But once you kind of hit your stride with a therapist, they can really help you with some heavy stuff and some stuff you've really been struggling with. To double back, I think more therapists need to talk about friendship from the get go, and they need to ask questions about that. That would really help.
Right. Yeah. I think that there's definitely, when you have a mindset of, um, yes, there's things in your past or whatever, but
Mhm.
it's really about moving forward. And I think that kind of, that mindset of, I don't want to go air all my dirty laundry. I don't, whatever happened to, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
But understanding some of those things and that connection to how you are now and what might be. And so I think it's easier for men who are probably, in a more growth mindset to do that. Like, I want to get better as a human. I want to get better
Yeah.
as a person. That seems to be an easier sell for them. But yeah, I think it's the therapy that I've done in my past has been an amazing thing. And the funny part is that the friendships I have now with my closest friends are like what I got out of therapy in terms of
Mhm.
understanding who I am and what I value and validating those things and challenging those things. When I have good friends around me, um, that's the same benefits that a therapist gave
Yeah.
me. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? So it's almost like
Mhm.
if you have a great friendship, even if it's just one, it's almost like that can play a part in helping you grow the same way a therapist would too, which is a real interesting thing because men are like, oh, I don't want to do therapy. But if you have good friendships, you're probably doing therapy.
I agree. I mean, I totally see a therapeutic value in friendships, and I mean, I lean on my friends all the time, and they lean on me. It's one of the beautiful things that friends do for one another that I think really furthers the relationship. And we can get into this a bit later, but I think a friend is somebody who's there for you during hard times and milestones, and you grow together and you challenge each other, and you're kind of repositories for each other's stories. I mean, losing my friend of 15 years, which I talk about in the piece. I mean, I'll never have that kind of friendship again. That's somebody who watched me grow up, and I leaned on him a
Mhm.
lot, and he leaned on me, and we built something together. So yeah, of course, there's obviously a therapeutic value in friendships. And I will say, don't lean on your friends too much, and that's where a therapist can come into play and really help you out. And if you feel some trepidation about sharing things, and many men do, even with their closest friends, this is a space where you can do it.
Right. Right.
You briefly touched on it. It's like you know what we're gonna ask. Um, but what is kind of a good friend in your mind? What are some of those dynamics that you need to foster a good relationship?
Yeah, yeah. Well, to Reed's point, I think a good friend is a good listener. That's also something that I
Mhm.
prioritize
Mhm.
in my friendships. Everybody's answer is going to be a little bit different. If you you're really into movies, maybe a good friend for you is somebody who is also really into movies. You can meet up with on the weekend and just watch movies. I know you guys just did a podcast with a director, was it?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I mean, these are also deeply held values. But more generally, I look for a capacity for depth. Of course, I want somebody whose interests kind of align with mine. But I say this in the piece. I want a friend who I can have long chats with, like deep into the night, about existential fears. And I also hope that that friend will also be cool, just shooting the shit and watching some dumb YouTube videos and uh,
Right. Right. Right.
having that kind of versatility. And again, keeping in mind that not every friend can do that or wants to do that. So maybe you have friends for certain times in certain places, but what is a good friend? I think somebody who just kind of gets you at the end of the day, being able to let your guard down, just be yourself, and that's huge. And that's what I found, and I'm sure you guys have found on some of these camping trips or these fishing trips, rather.
Absolutely. Yeah, you put multiple guys into, you know, a living situation for a
Hmm.
weekend for 3 or 4 days, and yeah, you're gonna learn some shit about each other,
Yeah.
in ways that you wouldn't if you just took a day to go fishing, right? If we just go
Hmm.
fishing and then you go home afterwards. But when you're socked into that, and you definitely learn, those moments come up, and those things
Hmm.
happen, and so that shared space is an important piece to it. Like, and people you can do that with easily, I think,
Hmm.
is a that's one of those. Yeah, okay, these are pretty good dudes.
Yeah. Yeah.
This isn't super difficult for us.
I also think it's important, like you mentioned, you know, you almost kind of have to. This might be a little discouraging for people, but you almost have to have certain friends for certain situations, and almost like
Mm.
you got to have a tool belt of friends in a way where,
Yeah.
um, you know, one friend is your friend that you go to about your marriage, and another friend's the person that you go to about health issues or whatever. But almost, realizing, you know, and trying to understand where you can push a relationship to, or where that relationship's taking you to, um, is a super important part of creating those strong bonds, and understanding and knowing that, maybe just having one friend, like you said, don't make somebody everything.
Mhm, mhm.
Just
Yeah.
don't put that expectation on somebody.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
yeah,
I like the idea of versatility, and you know what I mean. Like you said, friends got to be versatile, and I think that that's
mhm,
really huge. That's a big piece to it.
yeah, yeah. It's nice to know that your friends have some range. Of course, that hasn't
Right.
been my experience, and that's the experience of a lot of men. Is that there are friends for a certain time and place. I had, friends I would play cards with, in the evenings once or twice a week. And as much as I tried to kind of break free of these like cards only discussions, ask them what's going on in your life. How are you? How's your wife? How are your kids doing? They just really didn't have the capacity for that. And I think that speaks to just kind of being hardwired, uh, uh, kind of nurtured to behave in a certain way. And I feel like you have to perform masculinity or just kind of wall yourself off. I can only assume that, when I ask some people these questions and they don't have a good answer, or they don't answer. Um, I mean, they're simple questions. How's your life going outside of cards? they
Right.
might feel a little anxiety that they don't know how to answer that question. Um, yeah, versatility is nice, but I've learned to, uh, there's some cases where you just can't get it.
Right. Absolutely.
It's okay to have your just go get drunk with friends.
Oh yeah,
I'm just
yeah,
kidding. You gotta have your fun friends too, right?
yeah,
You
yeah,
gotta have fun. So
yeah.
speaking of fun, you are our first guest who is not a fisherman, but you do
Ooh,
love the outdoors, which is an adjacent hobby.
Yes.
Um,
yeah.
and in your piece, you talk about, some of the camping trips and stuff that you've done,
Mhm.
and they resonate and line up exactly with what we talk about on our guys fishing weekend. But if we were to go on a camping trip or outdoors trip with Chris, I'm sure we can get onto some water. We'll figure that part. We'll man that. But what if we came out to your neck of the woods? What would a trip together look like?
Well, I'll start by saying I'm honored to be the first non-real fisherman on the podcast. Thank you for that distinction.
Yes.
You're still an outdoorsman and adventure
Yes.
lover.
Yes,
So yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
you fit the bill, dude.
You do.
Great. I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, no, speaking of versatility, I hope that I could, I can rise to the occasion and
We can
match
still
you
make a
guys.
fisherman out of you.
Yeah.
We can still pull it off.
Yeah. I take you to one of my favorite places, which is Shenandoah, specifically Dolly Sods, which is in West Virginia. Beautiful part of the country. I'm in DC, and there are days when just the traffic and the noise gets to be too much, and I need to get in touch with that part of myself that I know just really attunes to like the wilderness and some quiet, and it's a place to think. And if I have friends there, like all the better. It's a great space to just allow yourself to open up and relax. um so I'm taking you probably about 5 or 6 miles deep into the West Virginia wilderness. Pretty good weather this time of year, 60 degrees, 70 degrees. I'm a bit of a gearhead, so it's trekking pole tents, and it's lightweight pads and sub 20-pound packs, and you know I
Nice.
will. Speaking of kind of like niche interests, one of mine is just like watching videos on camping gear and hiking gear, and just getting my pack dialed in. Like I get so much satisfaction from like getting my pack down and just like feeling totally self reliant in that aspect. Like it brings me to get a little poetic. I feel like it brings me closer to my great grandparents and my great great grandparents and people who just kind of lived off the grid. And I love just kind of feeling like I'm doing it myself, even if it's just for a night. And even if I got a cell phone in my pocket, it's just, you
Right.
know, yeah.
How so I haven't been backpacking in a while because I had, issues with my knee, whatever. But Ed and I have talked about doing, some backpacking up to some high mountain lakes and getting into some fish and some cutties. And so I think you just said like your backpack is 20 pounds, like less than 20 pounds. You can do like, is that I remember the backpacks with the frames and
Oh
like
yeah.
the camping gear was so goddamn heavy. It was like, it was
Yeah.
like backpacking. I don't know if I can, my back. So I imagine technology now, 20-pound pack. That's easy. You can fly with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really into, there's a guy named Dan Durston. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with him at all, but
Uh-uh.
he's like an avid hiker. I want to say he's out somewhere west, in like Utah or Colorado, maybe Colorado. But
Right.
he designed his own trekking pole tents. It's like the lightest trekking pole tent on the market. I want to say it's like under 2 pounds. It's a double wall tent. Um, Nemo is a company that makes some great sleeping pads. They just came out with one that's like also under 2 pounds, and it's got like this mylar insulation, super lightweight. And I try to compress everything into like, an Ultra 200X um, pack from like Hyperlike Mountain Gear. Just like, I'm really into these like companies that are so innovative and really just help you
Right.
enjoy the experience more, because, it's about finding that balance between comfort and uh, also practicality. Like I don't want a 40-pound backpack on my
Right.
shoulders
Right.
when I'm doing like a couple day trek. And I also, you know, I want to be practical. So, yeah.
Well,
Good.
since you're a gearhead and prone to addictive gear tendencies, we will not introduce you to fly fishing because you can go down some rabbit holes
Yeah.
and spend some cash.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
What would be your dream backpacking trip that you haven't pulled off yet?
So my family used to go out to Wyoming every summer. We used to hike the Tetons, and gosh, about 20 years ago, I hiked the Grand, which at last check was 13,770 feet. It was a multi-day
Hmm.
trip with these guys called the Exum Guides, who are like mountain bums who just like live off the land and like hike with no ropes and do this just crazy stuff. I'd love to go back there and do like a legit camping trip, like in the backcountry. I'll pack my bear spray and just take the risk. Go out someplace really wild.
Right.
Love to do a multi-day trek out there.
Nice.
The downside to being in this area is like I can get guys to go backpacking with me, but it's like a one night thing. Like they just can't
Right.
fathom filtering their own water, which I'm like, you got to do it at some point. You're gonna get dirty. You're gonna stink. It's gonna happen. Especially, I mean, with
Yeah.
fish, you guys know, like you
Yeah.
just, everybody smells after a couple of days.
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah, we just did an 8-day trip out in Wyoming, and
Nice.
fishing with bear spray on my hip was a new thing, and I haven't done that, and it was really kind of cool. It was awesome. We were in some pretty remote areas that were just phenomenal. So that's great.
Yeah.
And Ed
There's-
stunk really bad.
Why would you bring that up right now? We're trying to be professionals. You threw me off my game. Now I don't know what to talk about.
Fortunately, we can't smell
Uh,
each other through the
That's
video.
true.
Yeah.
That's true. I promise I showered after that trip. I promise.
Uh-huh.
Okay. All right. Well, how about we wrap this up with the GFW hot seat?
Let's do it.
Welcome to the GFW Hot Seat, where the name of the game is to answer the questions. And the prizes are... Wait, who said we have prizes?
Yes.
Wow. All right. That was unexpected, but I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Surprise. What is one thing that you're currently celebrating in life?
I'm headed to Japan in a week for the first time
Oh.
ever. I'm celebrating that. I'm going to get some much needed R&R and kind of DIY it, which I love. I can't
Yeah.
stand these trips that are like orchestrated. We're going to hit up a
Right.
few I think I'm saying it right, ryokans, which are like these like old-fashioned Japanese inns that like samurai used to stop at on their way
Right.
like to major cities, where it's like you're sleeping on tatami mats on the floor and like eating fish for breakfast, which is something that I'm gonna have to learn how to do. But yeah, I've been looking forward to this trip for years, and it's finally happening. So celebrate.
Oh, that's awesome.
That
Oh, that's
is-
amazing. Good
Have you guys been?
celebration.
That's a bucket list trip.
Yeah. Have either of you been to Japan, or
No.
that's
No.
the fish capital of the world?
I know
Yep.
it's a goodie. It's one of it's my wife and I. It's one of our. We have Costa Rica, Japan, and then I need to get back to New Zealand. Those three are. Japan is right up there as
Yes.
the one of the
Mhm,
next ones. So
Indeed. Chris, give us one piece of content, book, video, TV series, anything like that you would recommend to our listeners.
Yeah, so a big one for me is it's a book called The Wilderness Idiot. I have it right here. It's by this guy named Ted Alvarez, who writes for, I think it's Backpacker Magazine.
Okay.
I write for a living. I don't have a whole lot of time to read, if I'm honest, which is
Yeah.
my great shame. Speaking of shame, that's the biggest one, is that I don't read enough. And this is the first book that I read front to back in a long time. And it's a collection of short stories, which makes it really easy to digest. And the guy is just a beautiful writer. And anytime we spent time out in the backcountry, whether it's camping or fishing, and just like appreciating nature and that downtime, will really take to this book. It's one of my favorites and kind of an inspiration for me as I continue to write.
Excellent.
nice.
That will go on our recommended or guest recommendations for books.
What is one of your if you have a fishing memory? What is one of your favorite fishing memories? If not, what is one of your favorite backpacking memories?
Yeah. Well, I'll save the backpacking memory for those of you out there who want to read the piece. I do talk about that in the article. In Search of the Great Male Friend. My favorite fishing memory, I do actually have one. I'm not sure it's a real fishing memory, but I had a grandfather who lived down on the Chesapeake Bay. He had a house right on the water. And as kids, my brother and sister and I would kind of MacGyver our own fishing poles. So we would literally take like the biggest stick we could find in the woods, take some like thick twine, and then bend a paper clip, and then, I don't know, put some like dried bread on it or something. And we actually, believe it or not, like caught some fish, not big fish, and they must have been the dumbest fish in the Chesapeake, but they bit. And then we landed them on the dock, and we were like 5 or 6 years old, and like had no idea what to do, so we just tossed them back. But that's my fishing memory. It's the saddest fishing story ever that I'm sure you've heard, but it's
awesome.
It's a core childhood memory.
Right.
That puts a lot of other memories to shame just because of it's awesome.
Yeah. One, you mentioned MacGyver in your story, which is incredibly cool. And then two, that's like the foundation of your DIY kind of like trips and living off the land and doing it yourself. And yeah, dude, that's awesome. That's fantastic.
I'll get my wife in here so you can tell her that, because she does not believe, despite I'm wearing flannel right now for all the listeners. She says I'm not outdoorsy as I think I am. So thank you, Reid, for that accolade.
I'm all in, dude.
We'll cut that clip and send it to you. You can show it to her tonight.
Perfect. Love it.
Chris, what's one piece of advice you wish someone had given your 20-year-old self?
Besides invest in Apple stock. Yeah. Wow. It's a great question. Follow your intuition, I think is a good one. I was a shy kid. Speaking of making friends, I did struggle with some social anxiety, like so many young men. And I think had I kind of gone more confidently in the direction of certain friendships, or just taken more chances. I mean, I'll tell you, I spent this last summer going to maybe about a dozen concerts, seeing artists that I wish I had seen 20 years ago. So I saw Green Day at Nats Park, which was awesome. But, all these guys are like, they've got kids and they're tired and like, they don't want to be on the road. Like, it's different. But yeah, so if I had one wish, it would be, just generally be more decisive.
Nice. That's good advice.
Go to those concerts while you can.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is your definition of community?
Yeah, it's a big question. Yeah, community is it's friends, it's family, it's people you lean on, it's people you trust. Community to me is family, and family is a very kind of fluid notion now. There's an author, Ron Taffel, who's written for us quite a bit, who talks about friends being the second family. So people find family and community in many different places, and I would say, your people are your people, and your family is your family, even if they're not blood related. To me, that's community.
Right. Love that. Chris, what's one thing you've changed your mind about lately?
Running. I am not a runner. I used to be a runner. We were talking about this before the podcast. Ed's got a race coming up. My wife got me into Orange Theory, which is like this kind of cultish group workout class, where I am forced to run to techno for about 3 miles, and I can't. Initially, I couldn't do it, and I told her I'm quitting after a month. But I've stuck around. I guess I drank the Kool-Aid, and I enjoy it now. I fit in probably about 12 miles a week, and it's so gratifying to like look at the number of calories I burned and feel like I can like treat myself afterwards. So I've changed my mind about that.
Nice.
Heck
Good.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Do the Orange Theory cultists have like a name, like like Orange Heads or something?
Not that I haven't been inducted on that level yet. Yeah.
Oh.
I need to get my tattoo first.
I shouldn't. Yeah. I shouldn't have brought it up. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right.
Probably...
Or I have to initiate you first. I got to take you to the underground layer.
That's right.
I'll let you know.
He could tell you, but then he'd have to kill you. So yeah, that's
Exactly.
public knowledge stuff.
That's a good point. Well, our last segment here is our conversation between guests. And this question comes from Josh Caldwell. He's the award-winning director of the movie Mending the Line. And his question is, how do you see the perception or the embodiment of masculinity changing over time from what it used to be to where it is now, and where is it going?
There were a lot of big
Yeah,
rattly
there's a little bit
words
of a
in that.
run-on sentence.
No, I appreciate the. I gotta pull out a dictionary for some of those. Let's see. How do I see the perception of the embodiment? Basically, where is friendship headed? Where has it been?
Where's masculinity?
Masculinity.
Where's
Where's
masculinity, and how's it's changed over time, and where's it's going?
Yeah, so I've thought a lot about kind of this idea of masculinity. What it means. I don't think there's any one definition, and the idea of masculinity is kind of, the concept is pulled in all sorts of directions and kind of unfortunately mangled. And very often you don't hear the word masculinity without hearing the word toxic behind it. If you go
Mhm.
back 120 years, if you go to my my grandfather's generation, you had kind of the Norman Rockwell-esque portrayal of masculinity, where boys are boys and they're troublemakers and they're dirty and adventurous, kind of Huckleberry Finn types, and the fathers are like Atticus Finches, and they're tough but loving. They could throw a punch if they have to. And then going even further back, you got like the European concepts of masculinity, where there's like knighthood and nobility and virtue. Today's man, I think, is a bit softer, and I think more men. My hope is that more men are feeling comfortable being soft and showing those warm, loving sides of themselves. Um, that's not to say that these stereotypes don't still persist. That men have to be, we talked about performance and competition. That they feel like they have to be wealthy and muscular and ambitious and drive fast cars. And I know quite a few men who still buy into those stereotypes, but also have the capacity to be deep and vulnerable. They're part of that movable middle that I was referring to earlier. And so I know that enough men are out there who, if you spend time with them out in the woods and you give it time, you light a fire and you have a drink, they can be swayed to be the kind of friends you want them to be, and maybe more true to themselves. So my hope is that we're moving in that direction. My sense is that we're moving in that direction. Time will tell.
Good. Nice. Yeah, no, I agree with you.
So what is your one question for our next guest?
Mine is a much more lowbrow question, but it's, if you could have any superpower, what would it be? That's usually a very telling question. How somebody
Right.
answers
Yeah.
that is
Nice.
so.
Like that one. We haven't
dig
had
it.
that one yet. Good.
Okay, cool.
Excellent question. We did have once one of our guests, Eric Oram, asked. He was a basketball player, college basketball player.
Hmm.
He's actually a guide up in Wyoming at Two Rivers Slide Shop, and his question was LeBron or Jordan.
Ooh,
So yeah,
Yeah.
big basketball. That was
I thought
his
we weren't
first
going to
part
talk
of his question.
politics. We agreed no
Yeah, that's true.
divisive questions.
Them
Yeah.
them are war questions for sure.
Right.
Well, Chris, let our listeners know where they can get in touch with you if they had questions about this stuff or wanted to get in touch with you, pick your brain some more. How would they do that?
Yeah. So you can email me. My email address is clyford@psychnetworker.org. Same spelling as my last name, first initial CLYFORD. It's PSYCHnetworker.org. You can also check out some of my stories on psychotherapynetworker.org. We have a digital subscription that we're actually we're putting out in January. We're going fully
Awesome.
digital, and it's pretty cheap for a magazine. It's $12, so I like to think it's a good deal. And I tell everybody, hey, we're a therapy magazine, but you'll love our stuff even if you're not a therapist. I'm not a therapist, and I love it.
Right.
So, yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. It's been great having you on the show. Really good conversation.
Thank you,
And
guys.
can't wait to hook up and connect with you. I'd love to do a backpack, and we'd love to go out and hike to some really cool place to fish.
Yeah.
We'll put the
man.
backpack in, and the you pack all the gear, and we'll go fish. No,
Sounds great. I'm in.
right on.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Reid.
We'll see you.
Chris's piece, In Search of a Great Male Friend, is probably one of the most moving pieces I read this year.
Yeah, dude, that really resonated with you when you sent that to me. Reading it, I think the thing that stood out to me the most was his willingness to be open about that stuff, right? I mean, we talked about it on the show,
Right.
but I think that that's a huge thing, is that, you know, when are you vulnerable, when are you not? He really put himself out there, but I think it brings light to something that's super huge for us, right, as men, and the idea that, you know, we're searching for that kind of companionship, and we need that stuff in our lives.
Right. No, I think it's a super common topic, or just feeling that men have in general, and just that, you know, that feeling of, you know, buying a video game, getting all excited to play it, practicing the moves, like I'm gonna work this guy over with my fighting moves, and then to have him, you know, bail and you know, kind of be left alone and have nobody to play with. I think, you know, it's such an innate childhood feeling, but I think it happens like as an adult, and we just don't want to admit it. And I think, you said, you know, to be open and vulnerable about the, you know, something that almost seems like child's play.
Right. Yeah. You know, and it happens, you know, regularly in our lives. Like, I invite people to go fishing, and then when they're like, no, I can't go, dude, I got to work, I'm just like, I'm so bummed out because I got nobody to go fishing with.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So we experience those things on the daily. So yeah, it was great conversation. He's got a lot to offer.
For sure. Let's move on to celebrations and navigations. What are you celebrating?
I am celebrating return from visiting my parents, celebrating their 65th wedding anniversary. That's a huge deal. I feel like in today's day and age, and you know, with my aging parents and the difficulties that go around helping them out through things through the end of their life, that gets heavy sometimes. So it was fun. My brother and I went out and visited them out in Portland, and we just had a fantastic 4.5 days together. It was really cool. I think it did a lot for my father especially, and my mom, but you know, she's deteriorating a little bit with dementia. And so I think for my dad, just to get some support and some help and just have us around was really good for them. So it was really fun. And I don't know if you know this, but my dad still plays the stand-up bass. He's played it his whole life. Like from high school, he bought that bass that he still plays in high school. And he played a gig while we were there, and watching him at age 88 thump away on that thing, keeping up with these young guys in this jazz band that he plays in, dude, it was awesome. So to see
cool.
my old man still feeding his soul with music and playing the bass was really cool. So I got to share that. So that was awesome. It was fun.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. How about you, dude? What are you celebrating?
I am celebrating a successful Halloween. I think it was a fun time this year. Just seeing the little one just fall in love more and more with just the awesome parts of life, right? Like, you know, just the different traditions that you have, you know, this one being obviously dressing up and the costumes and the candy and the excitement for something, you know, again, just going back to like just things being so trivial to you as an adult, but as a kid, they just fucking glow up. It's just awesome. And so just seeing her being excited for certain things. We were at a Halloween party that her school threw for her little class, and just, you know, seeing her like so excited about the little goodie bags and the treats, and just, it was just cool.
Right.
So,
right. Nice. That's awesome. Those moments are keep them close, dude, because they go quick.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So,
that's good.
it was the first time she ever put any of those like plastic vampire teeth in her mouth, you know, and they were like almost too big for her mouth, but she was trying so hard and thought she looked so cool.
That's great.
Funny stuff like that. It's cool.
Right. Those are awesome moments, dude. That's great.
What are you navigating?
Mundane stuff. So here's another mundane one, like my pillow. I'm navigating footwear around my house, Ed. So here's the deal. I know that sounds like really stupid and dumb, and maybe it is, but I have hardwood floors throughout my house. As I'm getting older, foot support is important. As you know, I was a flip-flop guy. I live in my flip-flops.
Right.
But now I'm getting older. My feet get cold. I'm not. I've never. I've never been a slipper guy my whole life, and
How does it feel?
I'm finding myself needing some slippers, Ed. I need some recommendations for slippers. So, like last time, I don't know if you remember last time, Ed, we talked about getting some recommendations for pillows from our listeners. If anyone is still listening to this podcast at this point in time, jump on the mailbag and give me some slipper recommendations, because this is all new world to me.
My wife is probably going to be listening to this thinking to herself, ha ha ha, because she's always complaining about being cold. And so now she has, someone on the opposite sex saying I'm cold. So
I'm cold. I'm getting older, and I'm getting my circulation's lacking. I don't know what the hell it is, but I'm cold.
Yeah,
that's all good, dude. So that's my lame navigation this week. How about you, Ed? What are you navigating?
I am navigating. It's kind of a fun navigation, but also an aggravating navigation of getting a trip planned with my dad. Not challenging in the sense of, not being excited about it, but, just putting all the pieces together of where to go, where to stay, all of that stuff, and lining it all up. It's a little bit last minute that we've put this together, so that adds a little bit more urgency, but just navigating, piecing that all together and getting amped up to fish in a place I've never fished before. So
that's awesome,
cool.
Dude. Yeah, that's fun navigation for sure.
Yep.
When you guys going?
Well, after this airs, it'll be the weekend after this airs. So
sweet.
Getting pumped. I'll be reporting back on the podcast after that, probably. So
nice.
We shall see.
Right on, brother.
Yeah. Well, this is another good episode, man.
Absolutely. Always good being with you. So that's awesome, man.
You as well. Love you, buddy.
Love you too, pal. Bye.